The sky above was a swirling ocean of black and ice-blue streaks lit by distant lightning that never seemed to touch the ground. Snow fell sideways, carried by winds that screamed like forgotten ghosts. Beneath it all, a dying shuttle roared through the storm like a wounded beast falling from the stars. Its metal skin glowed red from the heat of re-entry, engines sputtering like the last breath of something ancient and proud. Inside the cockpit, Commander Jace Carter gritted his teeth and fought the controls with everything he had. The dashboard blinked with warnings in angry red. Altitude dropping. Stabilizers offline. Navigation scrambled. Hold together. He muttered to the ship as if his voice alone could command obedience from steel. Just hold together a little longer. Outside the window, the landscape rushed up to meet him. White. Endless white, with streaks of dark alien vegetation like cracks in glass. The shuttle slammed into the surface with a shuddering impact. Snow exploded in all directions, panels ripped free. Sparks danced in the cockpit as Jace was thrown forward against his harness. Then silence. For a long moment, he just hung there, breathing hard, blood trickling from a cut above his eye, the world upside down and spinning too slowly to feel real. Eventually, he unbuckled, fell to the ceiling, which was now the floor, and groaned. Could have been worse, he muttered. Could have exploded on impact. He ran a systems check. Most of the supplies were intact. The emergency beacon was dead. Of course it was. The powered armor still functioned. Thank God for military-grade engineering. Minutes later, he stepped out into the storm, wearing the black combat suit helmet tucked under one arm. The cold hit like a wall. Wind screamed past, slicing through his blonde hair like frozen blades. Snow reached his knees. The air was so dry it burned his lungs. Mayday, Mayday, this is Commander Carter of the ESS Pathfinder. Does anyone copy? He spoke into the comms and got nothing but static. Interference. Something on this planet scrambled all transmissions. He was alone. Or so he thought. Something moved in the corner of his eye, a flicker of orange in the whiteout. He spun, pulse rifle raised, but saw nothing. Just the storm and the silent alien trees. Then came a voice deep, melodic, and unshaken. You are trespassing, human. He turned slowly, pulse quickening. She stood there like something out of legend. 8 feet tall skin the color of molten bronze armor made of layered scales that shimmered orange with every breath. Her eyes were golden slits that locked onto his with a gaze that saw more than just his body. I take it you are not with the Welcome Committee, he said, lowering his weapon just enough to show he meant no harm, but not enough to look weak. The alien queen tilted her head. Her weapon, a fusion of spear and rifle, did not lower. I am Velara, queen of the northern dominion of the Solarian Empire, and you are either very brave or very foolish to land on sovereign ground. Jace managed a lopsided grin, despite the blizzard and the fact that she could probably crush him without blinking. Well, Your Majesty, I was actually aiming for somewhere less frozen, but fate had other ideas. Velara narrowed her eyes. You jest in the face of death. No, Mom, he replied, just trying to stay warm and keep my head attached. She studied him in silence, and something strange passed over her face. Not anger, not suspicion, curiosity. Perhaps you are not entirely useless, she said finally. The storm grows worse. You will come with me. As a guest, Jace asked. As my prisoner, she corrected. He shrugged. Could be worse. Lead the way. And so, under a storm-ridden sky, a human and an alien queen disappeared into the snow, leaving behind the wreckage of a shuttle and the first footprints of something that would shake the galaxy. Something no one believed possible. The door slid open with a whisper of ancient mechanisms long buried beneath ice and stone. Warmth spilled out into the frozen wind, a soft breath of life in a world carved from winter. Jace followed silently, stepping into the glowing interior of Valara's outpost, boots crunching against the metallic floor that radiated faint heat. Behind them, the mountain rumbled again, a deep growl from within the earth. The entrance collapsed in a spray of snow and stone, and no way back, no way out. Jace exhaled slowly, eyes scanning the corridor ahead, smooth metal walls lined with strange organic symbols that pulsed with faint orange light. The air smelled of minerals and ozone, alien, sterile, alive. Valara didn't flinch. She strode forward with purpose, each step echoing with command. Her presence filled the space. The ceiling forced her to duck occasionally, her towering form built for open skies and battlefields. "Where exactly are we?" Jace asked, voice calm despite the thrum of adrenaline in his veins. "One of my winter strongholds," Valara replied. "Rarely used, shielded from orbital scans. Designed for survival, not comfort. Nice place you got here, bit remote." She glanced back at him with something between amusement and suspicion. "Your humor is persistent. It's the only thing keeping me from screaming." They reached a central chamber where amber lights flickered over curved consoles. She moved to the control platform and began entering commands in a fluid sequence. Holograms bloomed into the air, status reports in a language he couldn't read. "The communications array is damaged," Valara said flatly. "We are cut off." "Well, that tracks." Jace leaned against a wall, removing his helmet. "Could be worse. Air's breathable. Systems are stable. And the company is more interesting than expected." She looked at him sharply. "Do not presume this situation grants you familiarity." He raised his hands in mock surrender. "Hey, I'm just saying. You saved my life. I appreciate that, even if you did call me a prisoner." "You are a prisoner," she said, "but I do not take pleasure in unnecessary suffering. My empire values order, not cruelty." "Funny," Jace said, "because so far this feels a little like fate." "Fate," she echoed the word like it was foreign. "You ever think maybe the universe has a twisted sense of humor? You crash into the snow expecting death, and instead you meet someone who points a weapon at you, then offers shelter." Valara folded her arms, the armor shifting with a soft hiss. "You are strange, Jace Carter. You can call me Jace." She paused, then spoke his name deliberately. "Jace." Something shifted in the air. He stepped forward slowly, careful not to provoke. His voice lowered slightly. "You ever meet a human before?" "Number. You are the first. Then, let me just say one thing. We are more than what your intel tells you, and you're not what I expected either." She studied him in silence, her golden eyes unblinking. "You were not afraid, even when I threatened you. I've seen worse than a tall, angry alien in armor. And yet, here you are, still speaking, still smiling. Habit." He grinned. "Also helps that you're fascinating." Valara turned away before he could see the way her expression shifted. "Rest," she said after a moment. "We will need strength. The storm may last for days." She moved toward an arched doorway and vanished into another chamber. Left alone, Jace sat on a bench near the main console. The hum of the structure lulled the room into uneasy quiet. He glanced around and whispered mostly to himself. "Not exactly the first contact I imagined, but hell, maybe it's the one that matters." Somewhere deeper in the base, Valara stood by a viewport, watching the snow swirl outside. Her hand drifted absent-mindedly to her chest, where her hearts beat just a little faster than usual. She did not know what to call this feeling, but she knew it had begun the moment he smiled and didn't flinch. And outside, the mountain groaned again like the world itself knew that something was changing. The storm outside howled like a living thing, battering the mountainside with relentless fury. Within the outpost, however, time had slowed. The days passed in a rhythm dictated not by sun or stars, but by systems' hums, shared silences, and the flicker of firelight in the common chamber. Jace sat cross-legged near the heater core, stripping down a damaged ration pack with his combat knife. Across the room, Valara stood motionless, her gaze fixed on a panel of diagnostics glowing in the soft amber of emergency lighting. She had not spoken in hours, not since their morning sparring session. He watched her move, each gesture precise, deliberate. She was elegance forged in war, taller than any human, stronger than any man he had served with, and yet there was something deeply human in the way she hesitated before speaking. Something vulnerable buried beneath the steel. "So," Jace said, breaking the quiet, "do you always train this much, or is it just to intimidate your prisoner?" Valara turned slowly, her expression unreadable. Strength must be maintained, especially in isolation. "Right," he replied, tossing the ration wrapper aside. "Because nothing screams survival like breaking 3 of my ribs in a sparring match. I held back," she said without apology. "I noticed." He winced as he stretched. "Still appreciate it." She walked toward him, stopping just a few feet away. From that angle she towered over him. Golden eyes glowed faintly in the low light. "You provoke easily, Jace Carter. Yet you do not react with fear. Fear doesn't stop the cold, doesn't fix the comms, doesn't make the days shorter. Humor does, or at least it helps." Valara tilted her head. "You are not like the others described in the Empire's files. Crude, weak, emotionally erratic." Jace shrugged. "Maybe your files were written by people who never actually met us." She stepped closer. "Or maybe we underestimated what lies beneath the surface." There was a silence, a deep one, the kind that carries weight. Jace stood slowly. They were close now. Close enough for his breath to fog against her armor. He looked up at her, unblinking. "What do you see when you look at me?" he asked quietly. Valara's eyes searched his face. Not just studying, seeing, beyond skin, beyond species. Conflict, she said. Curiosity, strength, and something reckless. "You make that sound like a flaw. It is not, but it is dangerous." He took one step closer. "So is trusting someone who was supposed to be your enemy." A beat passed. Another. Then, without warning, Valara reached out. Her fingers brushed the side of his face. Her touch was unexpectedly gentle. Her thumb paused near the scar on his brow. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Your skin is warm, fragile." Jace smiled. "And yours feels like fire, controlled, but ready to burn everything if pushed." Their eyes locked. "This is foolish," Valara said. "Completely," Jace answered. Still, they didn't move away. Valara leaned in slowly, her hand still against his cheek. He met her halfway. Their lips touched, just once, just enough. Not a claim, not a demand, a question. When they pulled apart, neither spoke. Valara stepped back first, her face unreadable again, but her breath slightly uneven. "This changes nothing," she said. Jace's voice was steady, "I know." But deep inside, beneath their armor and history and duty, something had shifted. The kiss was small, barely a moment. But in that moment, the rules of 2 empires cracked. The next day would bring consequence. The storm would end. The outside world would return. But for now, they sat in the quiet together and let the fire burn. The storm finally broke on the 5th day. Dawn crept in pale and silent, painting the snowy world in hues of silver and blue. Sunlight pierced through the jagged cracks in the mountainside, refracting against ice like shards of glass catching fire. Inside the outpost, silence hung heavier than usual. Systems whirred, lights flickered, and Valara stood in the central chamber, one hand pressed to her abdomen, unmoving. Jace entered half-dressed in his suit, helmet under one arm. His voice was casual, but edged with concern. "You're up early. Thought you'd be sleeping in after last night's diplomatic breakthrough." Valara didn't answer. He stepped closer, noticed the strange pulse of her skin, a faint shimmer beneath the surface like molten energy shifting just under control. "Valara?" She turned slowly. Her golden eyes were wide, not with fear, but with something he hadn't seen in her before. "Wonder. Something is happening," she said quietly. "I feel different." Jace placed the helmet on a nearby panel and approached. "Different how?" She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she reached for his hand and guided it, slowly, deliberately, toward her stomach. "Feel." His hand rested against her armor, then her skin. There was heat, a rhythm, a flutter beneath the surface that did not belong to her. His suit interface beeped. He froze. Valara raised her eyes to meet his. "Say it," she whispered. He swallowed, scanned the readings again. The data streamed in wild, chaotic waves. "Your hormonal profile has shifted. Internal energy signatures are spiking. Cellular replication is occurring at an exponential rate." He looked up, voice suddenly hoarse. "Valara, you're pregnant." She let out a breath that shook the air. A child, a hybrid, growing inside her like a seed no one had dared imagine could take root. "This is impossible," she murmured. "Our species are not genetically compatible." Apparently, no one told the universe. Jace ran his hands through his hair. "This doesn't make sense. It shouldn't be happening. But it is," Valara finished, her tone quiet, resolute. She turned away, pacing. Her body moved differently now, still powerful, still precise, but there was a new weight to her steps. "This will ignite war," she said. "My people, the genetic purists, they will see this as corruption, as abomination. And what do you see it as?" She didn't answer immediately. Then, "I see possibility." Jace approached her slowly, stood at her side. "So do I." They stood together for a long time, staring out the window as a new dawn broke across the frozen mountains. Behind them, the outpost pulsed with quiet life. Jace reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. "We'll figure it out," he said. "Together." Valara looked down at their joined hands, then nodded once. Then the moment was shattered by a tremor, a low rumble beneath their feet. Warning lights blinked to life. "Proximity alert," Jace said. "Multiple heat signatures, approaching fast." Valara's face hardened. "They found us." "Who?" Jace asked. "The Empire, or worse, those who wish to silence me before the truth spreads." Jace grabbed his helmet. "Suited up, then we don't run. We protect what's growing here, no matter what." Valara drew her weapon. For the first time, she didn't tower over him like a queen over a subject. She stood beside him like an equal, no matter what. The mountains trembled again. From the narrow overlook near the outpost's rear, Jace watched shadows descend from the sky, sleek black ships cutting through the clouds like blades through silk. He counted 3, maybe 4, before the tactical overlay in his helmet confirmed what he already feared. Solarian strike craft. Imperial class, not scouts, not messengers, hunters. Behind him, Valara stood still as stone, her gaze locked on the horizon. Her armor shimmered faintly, reflecting the golden dawn. Her expression was unreadable, but Jace had come to recognize the slight narrowing of her eyes, the tension in her jaw. She was not surprised. "They found us sooner than I hoped," she said quietly. "You knew they would come. Of course, I am the queen. I vanished without command. Now I reappear with a human, and more." Her hand moved to her abdomen, almost unconsciously. Jace noticed. The subtle movement said more than any proclamation. "They're here for you," he said. "For the child number." she corrected. They are here for the idea of the child, the threat it represents. Jace turned to face her fully. Then let's not give them a chance to destroy it. Moments later, the two emerged into the command chamber where a hastily activated communication relay sputtered to life. A flickering blue hologram resolved into the stern face of General Theric, his armor ceremonial and menacing, his voice like a war drum. "Your Majesty," he said, the title laced with venom. "You were believed lost. Some hoped dead." Valara did not flinch. "As you can see, reports of my demise were premature." Theric's eyes flicked toward Jace. "And who is this contaminant standing at your side?" Jace crossed his arms, stepping into view. Commander Jace Carter, human. Still very much alive. "Sorry to disappoint." "You've brought disgrace upon the Empire," Theric growled. "The rumors are spreading like wildfire. That you carry a hybrid, that you've consorted with one of them. Rumors," Valara said, "soon to be truths. Then you leave me no choice. By order of the Genetic Council, you are hereby relieved of your crown. You will be taken into custody and examined. The aberration will be neutralized." Jace's eyes narrowed behind his visor. "Say one more word like that, and I'll show you what a real aberration looks like." Theric's lip curled. "This matter is beyond your comprehension, human." "Number," Jace said, stepping closer to the transmission. "It's exactly what I understand. You're scared because this child proved something you never wanted to face. That evolution does not obey politics." Valara stepped forward. Her voice was calm, but her presence consumed the room. "I am still your queen, and until this empire recognizes what is coming, you answer to me." Tharic's image distorted briefly, then solidified, then prepared to be removed. By force. The transmission cut. Red lights flared. Multiple hostiles incoming, Jace confirmed. He turned to Valara. "What's the plan?" Her face was made of fire and ice. "We don't run, you sure? You're carrying something a little more precious than royal blood now." She looked at him. "Not as a queen, not as a warrior, as a woman about to risk everything. And you are the reason it exists. Together then, together." The base shook as the first blast landed against the upper shielding. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Consoles sparked, doors sealed. Jace slung his rifle across his back and moved beside her. "Let's give them a reason to rethink their doctrine." Valara smiled, faint, fierce, "and show them what happens when the future fights back." The sky above cracked open like a wound. From the colony of New Bastion, one of Earth's farthest settlements, alarms screamed across the city towers. People rushed to shelters. Defense systems activated with sharp mechanical urgency. Massive plasma batteries turned skyward, tracking dozens of alien vessels descending through the atmosphere like falling stars. Commander Reyna Wolf stood in the command center, her jaw tight as she watched the tactical screens fill with red. Solarian ships. Not just scouts, not just a delegation, a war fleet. At the center of it all, one single vessel shimmered with a different signature. Golden bronze hull, non-aggressive posture, royal identifier codes streaming behind it like a silent banner. It was hers, Valara. Reyna narrowed her eyes. "Send word to all units. Do not fire unless fired upon. Patch me through to Commander Carter." Far above, aboard Valara's flagship, the Solstice Blade, Jace Carter stood beside the Queen, watching the storm of politics unravel in real time. Multiple enemy signals, incoming threats, and worse, split loyalties. Half the Solarian fleet had followed Valera's banner. The other half followed General Theric. "He's mobilizing," Jace said, watching the enemy ships shift into a loose combat formation. "If he strikes first, your people will tear each other apart." "They already are," Valara replied, her voice low. "But not all wars are won with weapons." She stepped forward, activating the main broadcast system. Her image appeared simultaneously on every Solarian ship, every human outpost, and every public feed connected to the galactic net. Her voice carried without echo. Pure. Commanding. "This is Queen Valara of the Solarian Empire. You have heard the whispers. Let me now speak the truth. I carry a child conceived not through conquest, not through manipulation, but through choice, through something deeper than duty, something both our species have long feared to name: love." There was silence across the fleets, no commands, no movement. Then Tharic's voice cut through the stillness like a blade. "You betray your kind. You embrace corruption. That creature beside you will lead us into extinction." Jace leaned into the screen. His tone was calm, casual, deadly. "That creature is me, and the only thing I'm guilty of is giving your queen a reason to believe in a future where your fear doesn't rule anymore." Valara's golden eyes gleamed with fire. "I am not corrupted, Tharic. I am evolved. Our child is not an abomination. She is proof that unity does not mean sameness, that peace is not born from purity, but from courage." Tharic's ships powered up weapons. "So be it," he growled. But before the first plasma torpedo launched, something else happened. One by one, Solarian ships began to power down their weapons. One by one, captains opened communications, declaring allegiance to the Queen. The tide turned not with fire, but with choice. Tharic screamed into his comms, ordering compliance, but the officers no longer obeyed. Even among his own vessels, hesitation spread like wildfire. Some turned, some fled. Only a handful remained loyal, fanatics. He activated his flagship's weapons, targeting the Solstice blade directly. Valara's expression hardened. "Commander Carter?" "Yes, Your Majesty. Would you like to help me finish this rebellion?" Jace smiled. "Thought you'd never ask." What followed wasn't just a battle. It was a statement. Jace coordinated the hybrid fleet, human unpredictability and Solarian precision working as one. Valara stood tall at the helm, issuing commands with clarity and fire. The enemy ships fell, one by one, until only Tharic's remained, damaged and drifting. Jace turned to Valara. "One shot. End this." "No," she said. "Let him watch. Let him see what a future without him looks like." Across the system, screens displayed the image of Valara and Jace standing side by side, and behind them the growing silhouette of her stomach. The unborn child glowing faintly under her armor, her life energy visible even through the ship's sensors. A beacon. A beginning. The galaxy had not prepared for this. No one had anticipated that one small child, still growing, could fracture centuries of belief, politics, and fear. But in the wreckage of battle and the silence between moments of violence, something new was taking root. Inside the Solstice blade, deep within the royal chambers, Valara sat, her back pressed against a padded recliner. Her armor was gone, replaced with simple clothing woven from the finest materials of both human and Solarian design. The lights were dimmed, the room cool. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a quiet serenity. But it was an illusion. Jace stood beside her, watching her breathe slowly, methodically, as his own heart raced. The monitor attached to her arm blinked with continuous readings of her health and the baby's progress. Each pulse of energy from the child felt like an electrical charge running through the very core of his being. "How are you feeling?" he asked quietly, though the concern was evident in his voice. Valara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stared down at her hands, her golden eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "This child is growing faster than I can understand," she said, voice laced with a mix of awe and anxiety. "Every time I think I have control, I feel something new." Jace moved closer, sitting at her side. His fingers brushed against hers, careful, gentle, but there was a certainty in his touch. "That's the thing about the unknown, Velara. It doesn't bend to plans. It's why we have to trust it, and trust each other." She looked at him, the weight of his words settling between them. She nodded once, but it was clear the weight of her people's expectations, the pressure of their legacy, was beginning to break through. "Do you ever wonder what will happen when they find out?" she asked. "The Council, the Empire. They cannot deny what I carry now, what we carry. I thought I knew what it meant to be queen, but now I am something else." Jace reached over, taking her hand in his. "You're more than a queen, Velara. You're a mother and a warrior. You'll show them what that means." "But will I?" Her voice faltered for the first time. "Will they accept that what we have is not just a political alliance but a new era?" Before Jace could answer, the room suddenly darkened, a warning flashing across the walls. A tremor. A deep rumble shook the entire ship. The lights flickered, alarms blared. The faint humming of the outpost's life support systems ground to a halt. Jace stood immediately, his combat suit activating with a soft hiss. Velara didn't move. She remained seated, her gaze piercing the chaos that now echoed through the vessel. "Something's wrong." Jace's voice was low and tense. "I'll find out what it is. Number." Valara's voice rang with authority, though a trace of weariness tinged her tone. "Stay with me. We're not letting anything else tear us apart, not now." "But Velara, stay." Her command hit like a hammer. Jace hesitated, then nodded, settling back beside her. It wasn't about duty anymore. It was about what came next, what they had built together. Moments passed. The tension between them thickened. Valara's breath quickened. She pressed a hand to her stomach again, her brow furrowing slightly. "It's happening faster than I thought," she murmured. "The birth, it's coming sooner." Jace's eyes widened, but there was no panic in his chest. Instead, he found something deeper, something ancient. "We're ready for this, Velara. Whatever comes, together." Velara took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling steadily as she closed her eyes. Her hand still gripped his. The door to the medical bay slid open with a soft hiss, and a voice, a familiar voice, called from the doorway. "Commander Carter, my queen, we've detected a breach in the ship's exterior. It's an Imperial vessel, but it's not one of ours." Velara opened her eyes. The time for hesitation was over. "Activate the defenses. Do whatever it takes to hold them back. I won't let anyone, take this child from me." Jace moved quickly, eyes set with an unwavering resolve. "You heard her. Lock everything down. No one gets through." In the chaos, the baby inside her stirred, a strange warmth filling the room, as if the child understood the battle outside, and inside, both human and alien hearts beat in sync. No matter what the world threw at them, no matter who came to tear them apart, they had built something stronger. And it was not just love, it was life. The battle above New Bastion raged on like an unstoppable storm. The Imperial fleet of Valera's enemies, led by General Theric, was in full retreat, but not without cost. Explosions echoed across the stars as each ship fell, some in a blaze of glory, others crumbling to dust. Valera stood at the bridge of the Solstice Blade, her gaze fixed on the devastation. Her hands were steady, her heart focused. But within her, a new storm was brewing. Beside her, Jace moved quickly, issuing commands to the fleet. His voice was a calm anchor in the chaos around them. "All human forces, engage with maximum force. Jace's voice rang clear over the comms. "Don't let them regroup. Stay in formation." The hybrid fleet, a mix of human ingenuity and Solarian might, was a force unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It had been forged in fire, tested in battle, and now it was rising to face the final push against Tharic's forces. In the midst of the war, Valara's thoughts were not on the battle itself, but on what was happening inside her. The child, their child, was growing, faster than any child had a right to grow, and with it, the bond between Jace and her had deepened in ways neither of them had expected. They had broken barriers. Now, they were creating new ones that would reshape the future of both their worlds. The emergency medics moved quickly in the background, keeping her monitored as best they could while still coordinating with the bridge crew. The tension was unbearable. Every minute felt like a lifetime. Jace turned to her, his face a mixture of concern and determination. "You're sure you're all right?" he asked quietly. "No more signs of trouble?" Valara smiled, her golden eyes briefly softening. "I'm fine. It's just the baby, the hybrid nature is making things unpredictable." Jace nodded, his mind racing. In the chaos of war and birth, he found himself thinking not just of survival, but of what was at stake, what they were fighting for, what their child represented. In the midst of the chaos, something else was growing, something that had nothing to do with weapons or politics. The child, now just weeks away from birth, was no longer a symbol of change. It was the future. As the battle intensified, the signal from the enemy fleet grew weaker. Their ships were disintegrating under the relentless assault. Only one ship remained, Tharic's flagship. It was massive, armored in layers of ancient defense tech that had survived the test of time. It wasn't just a symbol of his power, it was a fortress. Jace's tactical display flashed red, highlighting the last remaining enemy vessel. "This ends now," Valara said, her voice cold but determined. "We end this fight and we end it with them." Jace stood by her, unflinching. Together. The Solstice blade surged forward, leading the charge. Tharic's flagship loomed closer, its weapons blazing in defiance. But in that moment, Valara's presence, her very essence, seemed to saturate the battlefield. The forces around her, human and Solarian alike, rallied with renewed strength. Not just for survival, but for something greater, for their future. The final assault was swift. Tharic's forces, despite their power, were no match for the combined might of the hybrid fleet and the relentless will of two species determined to shape their own destiny. One by one, his ships were torn apart, their weapons turned against them. The flagship, his last bastion, was brought to its knees. And as the dust of battle settled, silence descended. The fleet was victorious. But more importantly, a new chapter had begun. Jace and Valara stood together side by side on the bridge of the Solstice blade, as the last remnants of their enemies were cleared away. "We did it," Jace whispered. Valara nodded, her gaze still fixed on the stars outside. "Not just us," she said softly. "We did it together. For them. For our child. For the future." And as the ship moved away from the debris of the battle, Valara placed her hand on her abdomen, feeling the subtle pulse of the child growing inside her. The future, their future, was no longer just a dream. It was real. It was just the beginning. What does the future look like when two worlds, once divided, finally come together? Let us know what you think in the comments. The universe is always listening.